In 2006, Channel 4 had asked Time Team to create a week-long live TV extravaganza. As we were in the middle of the Queen's 80th birthday year, we'd suggested an excavation at Buckingham Palace. The palace authorities were initially sceptical, and we didn't blame them. I was a Republican, so was Mick Aston, our lead archaeologist. The Windsor Press Office wouldn't want us recording any royal hijinks and selling the story to the socialist worker. But they relaxed a little when we appointed Lawrence Villamy as series producer. He'd orchestrated a number of televised royal events, was thought to be a safe pair of hands, and eventually, though nervously, it was agreed we should be given royal access, although not before I'd been taken to one side by their press office and asked for reassurance that I wouldn't cause any offence. Of course I wouldn't. We were old hands at this on Time Team. You had to keep on the right side of the punters. That was part of the job. We'd wrecked every garden we'd ever filmed in. Mechanical diggers had ground their way across the lawns of England. Flower beds had been destroyed. Enormous trenches dug across paths and through vegetable plots. It was extraordinarily generous, not to mention a bit daft, of anyone to be prepared to make such a sacrifice, and the least we could do in return was be polite and respectful to the occupants. We'd treat the royal family in exactly the same way. Furthermore, I said, I didn't feel any animosity towards the Queen, who I thought had done a remarkably good job in extremely trying circumstances. How many other rulers would have dealt with losing the largest empire the world had ever known with such good grace? It wasn't HRH I was opposed to. It was the principle of monarchy. The fact that the Queen could veto proposed new laws, could nominate bishops to the House of Lords, was the head of just one sect among Britain's many religions, that she sat on the throne only because her father... But by then the press attaché's eyes had glazed over. We'd both made our points. Any further conversation was redundant. The first part of Time Team's big royal dig was shot at a royal garden party. Lawrence's idea was that in our first sequence we'd ask the Queen if we could dig up her garden, and she'd regally say yes. But on principle, Mick refused to attend, and our chief digger, Phil Harding, said he'd only turn up if he could wear what he wanted and didn't have to comb his hair. There was much agitated discussion, at the end of which this was agreed, and we finally arrived at the garden party and stood in line, with Phil sporting a beige safari jacket and cowboy hat that made him look like one of the village people. After an excruciatingly long wait, the royal family finally processed out of a tiny, insignificant-looking door at one side of the palace, the men mostly tall, thin and stooping, the women short and dumpy with round faces. There were royal handshakes and brief bursts of conversation. I don't think the Queen had any idea who I was or what I was doing there, but following a whispered briefing from an aide, she asked me a carefully constructed question about my interest in archaeology, to which I gave a nondescript reply. Then I asked her if we could dig her garden, and she said yes. Job done. Prince Philip was a different kettle of fish. Archaeology, he harumphed. There's bugger all archaeology here. Won't be much of a programme. The whole bloody place has been dug up 20 times already. It was reassuring to find that he was exactly like I'd always imagined him to be. 30 years previously, I'd read reports of his rudeness and had been appalled. But now I found him amusingly straightforward, like someone pretending to be Mr. Magoo. He was very bright. He argued with me for far longer than he was supposed to, given the length of the queue. And when I tried to explain why we were optimistic about what we might find, he cited a long list of reasons why the area was likely to be barren. He eventually moved on. I had an animated discussion with the Duchess of Cornwall about traffic problems on the M4. Then we all went off for a sandwich and a slice of lemon drizzle cake. The show had been billed as a live dig, but it was actually as live. In other words, to avoid the necessity of excavating in the dark, we taped it an hour earlier than it was transmitted. This led to a lot of confusion, not least when, during rehearsals, I told the floor manager I was going to slope off for a pee, thinking there was an age before our cameras rolled, and he replied that recording was starting in 7 minutes, and no, it couldn't be delayed. I was in a quandary. The Portaloos were round the other side of the palace, much too far away for me to reach in time, but I was a middle-aged man, and there was no way I could survive a whole hour with a bladder about to split asunder. I proceeded with some urgency down the little slope that led to the main body of the garden, and after a brief reconnoitre of the ornamental trees, found a hornbeam which obscured the palace windows sufficiently to allow me to have a slash without causing offence. I was halfway through when I heard a whirring sound. Looking up, I saw a security camera which was fixed to the top of the trunk and was currently pointing straight down at me. I tried to finish as quickly as I could, but it's difficult when you're being observed. I struggled on for a while, but was interrupted again, this time by a figure bursting through the shrubbery. It was a copper, complete with a stab jacket and a very large Alsatian. He looked me up and down, the dog sniffed my legs, and they moved off again. "I bet everyone wishes they could do that," he murmured, before disappearing back into the undergrowth. The programme was a great success. While I'd been excavating at Buckingham Palace, Alice Roberts and our archaeologists were digging at Windsor Castle, and they discovered the Round Table. Sadly, it wasn't King Arthur's original Round Table. It was the rubble-filled foundations of a massive circular building Edward III had built in the 14th century to house the Knights of the Garter. They used it to dress up and indulge in acts of old-fashioned chivalry. And in honour of their ancient forebears, they named it after the most famous piece of furniture in early British history. It may have been nothing more than a piece of medieval show business, but this building was one of the most significant excavations ever conducted on Time Team, rather eclipsing the tiny 100-year-old lead horse which was my best find on the day. Prince Philip hadn't been mistaken. There was bugger all archaeology at Buckingham Palace. Still, my chipped little toy gave me something to be enthusiastic about.